Executive Director of the Center. And here with me today, from Baltimore originally?
No, I'm...
We have a new Images and Expressions Society who nominated Lizette Woodworth-Reese, who is a longtime educator and famous poet.
drops those things that are foreign
for candidates, or was it for...
What our mission, which beside Linda read what our overall mission is, but one night in bed I always keep this little pad of paper and pen because sometimes you wake up during the night and you think of things. And one night it came to me, this wording for us, that our mission really is adding her story to his story to tell our story. And I know we didn't mention that, but that was something that we all felt told what we were talking about. And I think both boys and girls and men and women could understand that we are adding our story. His story really was his story. We're adding her story to tell our story. Again, consistent with our philosophy of including everyone. It wasn't combating or countering or denying the recognition of the wonderful contributions many boys and men have made and continue to make. But we wanted equal footing. We needed to have her story be told strongly and fully, and done in a way that honored people, not created a new hierarchy. We had many exhibits over the years since the Heritage Center opened. One of the most lovely exhibits and meaningful was about the women in World War II. Because again, as with what I had learned about the Revolution, women in the Revolution, we didn't really know much about the women. We had the WASPs, we had the Waves. Most of us didn't have any idea what they did. Again, we knew they were nurses rolling bandages. We didn't know the other roles.
And didn't know much about Rosie the Riveter either.
And didn't know much about Rosie the Riveter either, and all the women who went to work in the factories. And then many of whom were not ready to go back home when the men came back to work in the factories. But one of the famous photos from World War II, for the ending of World War II. So we had this wonderful program, though, I should say, and Linda Lindsay and Wilhelmina Buress worked on pulling that together. And we had Brigadier General Wilma Vaught, who was the moving force behind the Center on Women in Military Service that's now at Arlington Cemetery, was with us. And we had people from the various branches of the military. But we also had something that's an iconic figure. Most of us are aware of that picture at Times Square when World War II was ended, and a sailor grabbed a woman, a nurse, and hugged her. Well, who was that woman? Over the years, there was a lot of controversy of who did he grab? Did they know each other? It turned out that it was a woman from Maryland, a woman from Frederick, Maryland, Greta Friedman. She said she did not know him at all. They were at Times Square. She came to our Women in World War II program and spoke about it on our panel, and told about how he had grabbed her, and that what became this iconic photo for the end of World War II.
The other part of her story that I find interesting is her personal story that I think is so important too, because we didn't know about those stories either.
That's right.
Do you want to share a little bit?
Why don't you share that?
Well, help me if I missed any of the details, but during that period, she was Jewish, and of course at that time many Jewish families were taken or whatever happened. But in her particular case, her family was able to get her out. I think it was her sister too, right?
Yes.
So that she and her sister went to New York and were raised by an aunt or some family member. And so she was one of the very few survivors in her entire family. So that, to be a part of the KISS was very important, but I think the story behind her and her survival and the stories of her family that she lost is an important part of her life story as well.
That's right. Yes. One other section that we did was, besides hoping that all of the things we had would appeal to children as well, young people as interpreted, And we also wanted everything to be accessible. We had many special education classes come to visit. We had people from rehabilitation centers with disabilities so that we were negotiable so that people could really be there. And one of the things we decided to have something interactive all the time for kids, and we created what we called the Curiosity Corner. And we had something hanging down that said Curiosity Corner, and the first thing we displayed there was we had some thing that was made of 2 slats of wood and 2 iron loops between them, and we had a guess what it is. This is something from women's history. What is it? And we had little notes where people could guess, and the kids loved guessing what it was. What in the world? It looked like some kind of torture device. A lot of them, the answers were amazing. And we got really just a large number from adults and from children. Finally, someone got it. This strange object, about 2.5 feet long, and with these loops on it, was a corset stretcher that women used way back then. Who even thought that they had to stretch their corsets? So
Was it designed by a woman as well?
It was that we didn't
No,
know
okay.
actually who designed it, but it was really interesting. None of us had seen it, and it was something that women had used.
The Curiosity Center also included some articles from NASA, Women in NASA, and my 4-year-old grandson thought it was wonderful. So it aroused his curiosity in the space program and women's role.
And he looked great in the space, the kid's
Right,
space
right.
outfit as well. The first major event we had was with one of our honorary board members, and we should mention we established an honorary board of well-known people. Senator Mikulski, Cokie Roberts, a renowned author and commentator, often on television news, and Dominique Dawes, and Nora Roberts was the Olympic gymnast, and Nora Roberts, the author. So we had a great, representation of nationally known people. Well, Cokie Roberts had written a wonderful book called We Are Our Mother's Daughters. And we asked her to come and speak for a fundraiser for the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. And she came and spoke. We were all involved with her, and she was tremendously supportive at that very successful luncheon, and certainly reinforced how much we are our mother's daughters and our grandmothers.
Again, high visibility, high profile, which was so good for as we're establishing ourselves.
Yes. And Cokie Roberts' mother succeeded her husband, Hale Boggs, in the Maryland, in the U.S. Congress, because after her husband died, she took his seat, and thanks to Barbara Mikulski, we got to meet her as well, and applaud 3 generations there that were working for the patriotic wave for this country.
For many years, we've worked with the National Collaborative of Women's History Sites, and many of those were from the National Park Service. And they still talk about Maryland because we were instrumental at that time of getting more awareness of women's stories at the National Park Service area. So Jill, tell us how that happened, and that was quite a coup to get the secretary here.
Well, we were working with them, and they had meetings to gather people from the Park Service and around the country to the Sewell Belmont House in Washington, where Alice Paul and the Women's Party, and we had held the first meetings that they initiated from the National Women's Trail Group there to talk about why in all the national parks there's so little information about women included when they are interpreting at the different sites, and why aren't there more women's sites that are included throughout the Park Service. Well, because of our engagement, when it came time to really move forward on this, Secretary Salazar, I'm sure in part because of Barbara Mikulski and her involvement with our center, chose to hold the first ever national town hall on women's interpretation at historic sites in the Park Service at the Maryland Women's Heritage Center in Baltimore. Having the Secretary of the Interior come, Secretary Kenneth Salazar, meant that we all had to be cleared by the Secret Service for the stakeholders meeting that we had first. We had a very big turnout, including the mayor of Baltimore. People from the National Park Service clearly were there. And as a result of that national town meeting held at the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, again a national first, from that point on, they developed a plan for interpreting about women in all National Park Service sites. And one of the things that was very moving to me was when we went to the site through the National Women's History Project in Little Rock, near Central High School, where there was all the issues for desegregation. That site had now featuring on the women, and one of the women who was in the Little Rock 9 that desegregated that school, her daughter, who she named Spirit, was the interpreter at the National Park Center in front of Little Rock High School.
Wow.
Another outcome of that is that recently we're working with the Pomeroy Foundation, and I think a lot of that was their awareness of what the National Park Service was trying to do. So in our case, they are funding 5 markers for Maryland, but they're doing this for 10 other states in the country. So it's another way of promoting women's history and those markers to let the story be told.
Talking about the National Park Foundation, there are 9 women that have been inducted into the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame that have also been inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. And one of them has in Seneca Falls. And one of them has a National Park Service marker by her house, and that's Harriet Tubman. It's part of the National Park Service now.
Okay. Among the visitors that have come to the center numerous times were Fulbright teachers from all around the world. And one of those teachers, many of those teachers said they went back to their countries, and we've had at least 25 different countries where people went back and initiated programs similar to ours in their countries. And an actual sister center was established in India by one of the educators who had come to our center. They did a display, they did a whole room similar to what we had at the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. They included some of our material, and they dedicated this center for girls in India, where it's still very badly needed, to the Maryland Women's Heritage Center.
And we have some of those pictures still on our website because it was such a unique story of how, again, the global impact of the work of the center.
Title IX is the law that projected and was brought about by Bernie Sandler to protect both boys and girls in equity in schools, equity in education, but primarily related to equity in education, and Jill mentioned before how she did that too. She has certainly, she was honored at a Maryland women's basketball game. She had never been to one, but their team did really well because she really related to Title IX. So we had a suite, and she went down on the court and was thanked very much for her work and was given a championship basketball by the Maryland women's basketball game at the University of Maryland. But we have her to thank for Title IX in all the areas that it has covered, and Maryland has been a leader since it was instituted in 1972.
And Linda arranged each year the University of Maryland women's basketball games for us to have a box, and Brenda Fries, who was the coach of the women's basketball team, arranged for us to have a box for the Women's Heritage Center, which was kind of a reward for our volunteers, for people going to the game and cheering together at the university.
Another activist on Title IX was Dot McKnight at the University of Maryland, who helped all the women's sports grow at Maryland and was very well rewarded.
Yeah, and when we had our panel on the 20th anniversary of Title IX, Dot McKnight, Bunny Sandler, and Susan Schaefer from the Mid-Atlantic Equity Center, who Susan is also a Maryland woman who's been my partner from the very beginning. We're all on a panel, as well as Margaret Dunkel, who was instrumental in working with Bunny, and she's from Southern Maryland, on that panel.
But you think about, again, all that background you did with Title IX and the women and the coaches, now the popularity of women in basketball and soccer and those scholarship opportunities for those women is just astronomical. So you laid the groundwork for that as well.
Well, interestingly, once Title IX was passed, then when it was passed in 72, but implemented by 75. And we had 3 years of school systems and universities of higher education had 3 years to figure out how to do an institutional self-evaluation, see where they were, and determine what, if any, steps they needed to take. And it was Maryland, again, that pioneered piloting the institutional self-evaluation for all public school systems in the United States. We did it on a very cold winter's day when we were working on the form. We did it in a recreation center, which it turned out was unheated that weekend. The heat went off. And so we had women from Delta Sigma Theta, from Alpha Kappa Alpha, from AUW, from BPW, from PTAs, from the Teachers Association, all were huddled together in this unheated recreation center. And PEER, the Project on Equal Education Rights, was very active then, leading us in figuring out how we could do a pilot of having a school system figure out what was going on. And one of the things that was unusual, this was one of the very first times that we were asking school systems to disaggregate their data so that we actually knew what were the facts for girls and what for boys. And where they cross-tabulated African American girls, we call them black then, girls versus white girls, so we got to see how it broke down to see where were the inequities, where were the areas where we needed to do additional affirmative work to make sure everyone was brought up to have the opportunities for success. Because Title IX was not just, and still is not just, about athletics, but it's about coursework, it's about mentoring, it's about honors, it's about opportunities for scholarships. It's about every aspect of education, not only athletics, which is the most important, most well-known, I shouldn't say the most important. But I should say, recently I was at the memorial service for Bunny Sandler, and one of the speakers was Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's the non-voting member of Congress from the District of Columbia. And she said it was a time when the U.S. women were again competing in the World Cup for soccer. And Eleanor Holmes Norton said at that memorial for Bunny Sandler, she said, it's because of Bunny and those of you who are here who have worked for Title IX that we have this team, that the 99 women's soccer team existed, and that these women again have benefited from the legacy of Title IX.
Another woman in Maryland who has done so much was the president of NOW, Linda Mahoney, who's done a lot of workshops on Title IX and gender equity and has just spread them across the state.
Yeah, I think that's very important, and that the leadership of NOW in that training for Title IX originally through Linda Mahoney, who remains a real figure in our state and in our nation, really, in terms of the persistence. I think she's one of the people who personifies this persistence.
And she continues to work with our board.
Right, that's right.
For that collaboration and coordination.
One of the areas of importance, too, is women in the arts, both literature, painting, sculpture, video, all fields of the arts, all media, all fields of the arts. And we had two incredible people who were throughout. One was Ellie Elgin, and the other is LORETTO GUBERNATIS, who has to be recognized for the video work all the way through, for the things she directs and produces, not just about women in the Women's Heritage Center, but really areas of importance to societies, including race and gender and other issues that are so important. And it was the same LORETTO GUBERNATIS and Ellie Elgin who created these exhibits at the World Trade Center in the Baltimore Harbor of women artists in various fields and of various ages and various kinds of art for 3 different years.
We had at the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, Maryland Women in the Arts, we had a terrific exhibit developed by artist and photographer Josie Thompson. And we used materials from 2 of the kits that we did on Women in the Arts. And we had
And we added the First Lady.
that, absolutely. We added the First Lady as an artist herself and how much she's contributed in the arts and how much she supports the arts. We really appreciated Yumi Hogan's work.
And she was there for the opening and spoke. And
She's honorary chair.
She was the honorary chair of that exhibit and was at the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. And I also want to recognize Gaynell Coburn, who was a percussionist, speaker, who played backup for Stevie Wonder and other people, as well as being an inspirational speaker. And she was Miss Wheelchair USA.
Right.
And did all that work. She was injured when I think she was 12 years old, in her teens. And she has done amazing things with her life, and she was collaborated with us again throughout and was able to perform when we honored women in the arts.
Also, we've talked about Jardine Nolan, how much work she has done in the arts and has won a number of awards. And one of her most famous books, a best-selling book, is called Eliza's Freedom Road, which is a story of a woman who escaped from slavery.
And we had the launch for that book with a cake with Eliza's picture on the front
And
at
it's
the
right
Maryland
there.
Women's Heritage Center. Rachel Carson, who Linda mentioned before, and who was really, in many ways, the mother of the modern environmental movement. And we were privileged to hold an event at Rachel Carson's home in Silver Spring, where we honored young women, high school and older, who are doing work to save the environment on various environmental issues. We held it in Rachel Carson's home, which made it doubly special for everybody. And one special vignette that I think in terms of her home, which impressed me, was her sink, her kitchen sink, had a mirror over it. And I thought, why would Rachel Carson have a mirror over her kitchen sink? She's not vain. What would you? It's very unusual to have a mirror over your sink. It turned out, because of her caring about nature so much and the environment, that mirror over her sink, which was an interior wall, looked out the window at her yard and the trees and the greenery. And so when she was doing the dishes, she still was connected to the environment. I think that was a beautiful aside and something that wouldn't be known about her.
We also have a member of our board, Kate Campbell Stevenson, who does a lot of performing of notable women, and she does performances about Rachel Carson, both in Maryland and across the country. So we're proud to honor Rachel Carson.
Okay, let me just add to the Women in Technology. Linda spoke a little about the work with Claire Parkinson at NASA. But Linda also met with women of NASA who helped develop a series of books and posters about women at NASA, women in science and technology in all areas of the field. So they had engineers and they had cosmologists, I don't know what you call them. They had all kinds of scientists and young women, older women, diverse women that and NASA partnered with us. The National Aeronautic and Space Agency partnered with the Maryland Women's Heritage Center to develop a book and a series of posters about women in various areas of their work, from the Mars rover, and in fact Florence Tan, one of the women working on the Mars rover, came all the way in from California to meet with our kids when we had a workshop. And she was a little out of it. She said, "I'm sorry, but I'm on Mars time." And she wasn't quite there. She was wonderful.
And again, many of these beginnings that you and Jill worked on, we're still using today. We've updated the website again, so many of those people are part of our interactive website. And the Women's Heritage Center is, again, an ongoing partner with Girl Power, which is a career fair for young girls to, again, hands-on explore. So we built on all the work that you did.
Yeah. Well, let's finish on the NASA part, that the set of posters and the book were given to all the schools in the state, and they've been used throughout the country.
And the community college as well.
And the community colleges, the libraries, the schools, And everywhere in the country, the work of NASA obviously is relevant, not just to Maryland. If we could have printed many more, we would have. But in fact, thanks to the partnership with NASA, we were able to keep one of their modules there so that people could actually access more information on the women who were in the display and in the book. And NASA was able to fund the printing of the posters and the books that went throughout the state and throughout the nation. We had many programs for youngsters, because those are the ones we want to inspire, and all kinds of youngsters. And Girl Scouts of Central Maryland was a frequent supporter. We did workshops at their leadership conferences for girls, on their site and at their events. And people who are now actively involved with the center directly, Maria Darby and Danita Terry, both brought Girl Scouts to the center for programs. And that was a really important partnership. And in fact, when Secretary Salazar came to do this Park Service event, one of the people that was invited was the National Executive Director, the CEO of Girl Scouts USA,
Right.
so that we had their engagement at that event as well.
One of the most interesting times was we also, speaking of Girl Scouts, where there is a troop that's called Girl Scouts Beyond Bars. And so those are the daughters of incarcerated women. So they wanted to make sure that those girls had access to role models and other career exploration things as well.
Yeah, which is very important. One of the other groups that was formed in Maryland called Schoolgirls Unite, and the big leader of that is Wendy Lesko, although I know she gives, as we do, all credit to the girls.
Right.
But they pushed the United Nations and pushed the U.S. and got proclaimed the first International Day of the Girl. And it was really Schoolgirls Unite that was instrumental in having that happen for the whole world. And Wendy Lesko had coordinated with us and had a big workshop, and where the girls designed interest stations throughout the center. Some were about current events, some were about, there was all different areas. The girls themselves set up the interest stations and helped inspire other girls and boys who came to the center to learn about what girls do throughout our country and the world. We had a big poster hanging in our center because our quest is to uncover these invisible names. And Lucille Clifton, who was Poet Laureate, first African-American woman to be Poet Laureate of Maryland. She was Poet Laureate from 79 to 85. And her two daughters worked with us very closely and continued to work with us after she passed away. But Lucille Clifton has one poem about those missing women. She said, "I need to know their names, those women I would have walked with, all those women who could have known me, where in the world are their names?" We hope that the Maryland Women's Heritage Center is helping to answer that question. And her daughters felt that way very strongly, and while they helped us go through. And one of our board members, Carmen Delgado Vota, who was co-chair of the first ever National Conference on Women with Bella Abzug back in the Carter administration, and the founder of the National Association of Puerto Rican Women, Carmen translated this passage from Lucille Clifton's poem into Spanish. And we had it at the center. We have it posted in a beautiful calligraphy that, again, a friend volunteered to say, both in English and Spanish, where in the world are their names? We need to know all of them. Okay. One of the historic places in Maryland, clearly, is Annapolis. And we determined, there's so many historic sites there to create, and Linda really took the leadership on this, in creating a tour of women's history in Annapolis. And it happened at that time that the very first woman mayor of Annapolis was in office, Ellen Moyer, and Ellen had actually been an executive director of the Maryland Commission for Women previously. And she was then the first woman mayor of Annapolis. She helped initiate that tour. We went to historic sites through Annapolis, including Mary Catherine Goddard, who printed the first version of the Declaration of Independence that had all the signatories on it. Well, Barbara Mikulski, obviously, was from Southeast Baltimore. She became a public official after they were trying to build a highway through her neighborhood, and she stood up all
As a social worker.
as a social worker to get that stopped. She was then on the Baltimore City Council and ultimately in the U.S. Senate. She worked with us. We invited her to be, we worked with her over the years, but then we invited her to be on our honorary board with these other people, women and girls that we mentioned. She was very supportive throughout.
Absolutely.
She helped us have a lot of contact with Congress. She was supportive when we were seeking support from the state, and we were invited actually to Congress for the party that the Congresswomen had for Barbara Mikulski when she left Congress after serving the longest of any woman. She had served for 40 years. And we were invited. And then when Barbara Mikulski was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame for all that she had done, we had a van load of us from the Maryland Women's Heritage Center rode up to Seneca Falls to be there with Barbara Mikulski and her family to honor, and others like Ann Lewis and Maggie McIntosh from our state legislature, to honor Senator Mikulski for all that she has done for women, for the aged, for low-income people, for,
NASA.
For NASA, yes, and it was extraordinary. And I should add, I know that there was a van load of people who went up to the National Women's Hall of Fame when Bunny Sandler was inducted as well.
And I videotaped the whole thing of her being inducted into
So now that we
That's
mentioned
great.
it.
I know, and she's in all the books, Maryland Women's History books that we have and online, and her picture's up there at the National.
And I just want to say that, I don't know if this will get in or not get in, but the Annapolis tour was on a red trolley that we went through downtown and all through these sites. But I also want to add that you helped coordinate with a gentleman named Tom Saunders women's history tours for the city of Baltimore.
Right.
That went several times, and people were just so moved by learning about those specific sites of women who had made tremendous contributions to the city of Baltimore. And it went, from areas like the Jewish Museum to Blacks in Wax. When we were seeking some funding for planning for the Women's Heritage Center, we approached the governor and we approached the state legislature. And we were needing to make our case. And we thought, what could we do to make a point that was visible? And that's difficult to figure out many times. Mm-hmm. But we knew this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, which is that a woman is like a tea bag. You never know how strong she is until she's in hot water. And what we did was we took hundreds and hundreds of tea bags, put these little notes on that said the Eleanor Roosevelt quote on one side, and on the other side of this that we tied on with ribbons, it says, "We urge you to include state funding for the Maryland Women's Heritage Center this year. Preserve the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame. Honor your unsung heroine." And we put our website. We presented a basket full of these to the governor's office, to the leaders in the legislature. For long time afterwards, when we meet people, they say, "You're the ones with the tea bags." But we were capitalizing and building on the wonderful comment of Eleanor Roosevelt, reminding us of how strong women are and what a difference they've been able to make, especially when times are tough.
Well, this has been an exciting afternoon to hear and be with our founders and all the work that you started and that we're continuing today. But as we're wrapping this up, are there any last thoughts or messages that you would like to share that helps keep the Women's Heritage Center and our mission going forward?
I think it's to look at all the quotes from people like Lucille Clifton, what an important time it is for young girls and women to know how much we can give to every area of society.
And Linda's the mother of a wonderful daughter, as she mentioned, and teaches women's studies. I'm the mother of 2 boys. And I want to also say that it's so important for the boys and the men to be equally engaged, as our families are. I know all of our spouses and children, because this is about humanity, this is about our story, and it's really important to honor them. We want to inspire boys also to venture in non-traditional areas and to be sensitive and caring, and that caring is not a negative trait in maleness, and that we can have collaboration not just across party lines in the society, but across gender lines, and there are many different ways of interpreting that today in our current culture. And I think that exploring all of this and building on it and inspiring the generation coming up in all its diversity is why this is so important. We hope will inspire them to continue to have a place and that they can meet and grow and build.
Thank you again for telling your stories today of over 40 years of work and gender equity and other areas of equity.
You said that, can I show one picture at the end? When Diana said over 40 years, in one of the kits, Linda found one as we were talking about getting together today. This was in one of the kits. We're three older women. We're three older white women. And as you can see in the kits and our materials, we don't reflect who's covered in the Maryland Women's History Project. It's everybody. But 40 years ago when we began this is a picture of me working with students, diverse girls, to look at how they could be leaders, how they can build their self-esteem, how they can help reduce prejudice, build collaboration, and resolve conflicts. And that's what this workshop was about 40 years ago. And so I think, again, part of the inspiration we hope for is that Linda and I and Diana are still here 40 years later to encourage girls and boys, but our special interest is those who were invisible, to be visible, to find your passion, to work on it, to persist, and to sustain so that 40 years later you can still be feeling like you can make a difference and work on making our country a better place.
Given our trip down memory lane today and hearing all these fabulous stories of the Heritage Center, and although I am a mature person as well, we're very much looking at younger women to help us pass the torch. So today, I'm so thrilled to have the torch from Linda and Jill, and the more light that we shine on women's history, the more stories that we learn and tell for our younger generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. You, I know, do the videotaping, but you have also shared so many ideas and so many leads and connected us with both funding and contact people over these years. So this is a very, very small present from Linda and me as founding mothers to you because of all you do that isn't, is.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
It's true. Thank you again. Thank you for joining us.